Hey guys, it's Cameron, and in this video I want to talk to you about how I went from being a broke teenager to being on over six figures a year at the ages of 21. Now, the best place to start for this story is probably going to be from the beginning, as it is with most stories. So what I've got is I've got a Red Bull here, so let me just open it and I can get straight on with the story. So in terms of where I started in life, right? So I'm currently 23 years old now, but I started off, I would probably say, in a decent kind of environment, right? And when I say that, I don't mean handouts from my parents, anything like that. And that kind of lifestyle stopped at the ages of about 14. So in terms of that lifestyle, what was it? Well, I was living in a house. It was a nice house in a nice area with parents that were together. I was in a decent school. It wasn't private, it wasn't a grammar, it was just a normal secondary school. I was getting bad grades, but it didn't really matter because I had a good home life and that's all I really cared about. Basically coming home after doing some lessons and then just basically playing video games or hanging out with my friends. So that was up until about the ages of 14. From there, probably about the ages of 12 actually, my parents then got a divorce around about age of 12, I think. Around about that age, I was quite young, so I can't remember exactly. But around the ages of 12, my parents got a divorce, which ultimately meant that the house had to be sold off. And I ended up, at the ages of 14, living with my dad, right? And that was in a two-bed flat in a pretty rough town. So I had to move out of the town that I grew up in to a different town. And in a two-bed flat there, and it was quite a rough area, right? There was a lot of crime. There was a lot of, chaos in the high streets and that kind of stuff as well. It was unsafe at night, that kind of stuff. So I was living there from 14 onwards to about 21, roughly. Now, in terms of that time, right? So from 14 to like the ending of being 16, I was doing my GCSEs, right? So I was doing just my general normal subjects you have to do for secondary school, and I wasn't getting good grades. I think I got GCSEs of C's and D's on average, right? So it wasn't great. It was probably that's barely a pass, right? It's equivalent to I had to do like a numbering system, so I got like 4s and 5s, which is equivalent to C's and D's. But essentially that was kind of like what I was doing, right? That was like my GCSEs, and that was basically what I got as grades. I wasn't taking studying seriously. I wasn't naturally smart. In this point in time, I think I had probably £100 in a young savers account that was put there from, I don't know, my dad, my granddad, something like that. And I didn't really touch it. To be honest, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought it was an okay amount of money. I didn't think I was like balling or anything like that. But this was when I was like 15 years old, right? So, yeah. Now, in terms of this, that's kind of my finances from that point. When I was 17, I ended up getting my first part-time job. Now, my part-time job, my first one, was as a waiter. My dad thought it was very important for me to have discipline at an early age for employment, for bringing money in, that kind of stuff. So I got my first waitering position, and it was through a friend that I knew. So I had a friend, and he had a friend who used to work, or who did work in the kind of restaurant, right? So I asked the guy, so my friend's friend, if he could kind of refer me for the position, and he's like, yeah, they're hiring quite a lot now. I can put you in for it, no problem. So I basically had like a half an hour interview. I wouldn't even call it an interview, it's more just like a conversation at this restaurant. And basically they hired me on the spot. They just said, look, you're going to have like a trial period. We're happy to have you. It's going to be I think it was like a 6 or 7 hour shift, not paid, and it will be on like a weekend or something like that. And this was alongside me doing A-levels. So I was doing A-levels, full-time education, just after GCSEs, so just after secondary school. And I was having this kind of part-time job on the side. Now, I used to work Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays I used to work like 6-7 hours, I believe. And then from Sundays it was like 4 or 5 hours. And then including that was like tips and stuff like that. But to be honest, the tips weren't a lot because it would be distributed out of like 8 people or something. So realistically, it's like basically minimal. But in terms of my hourly rate, I was on £4.35 an hour. Now, if you're thinking that's criminal, it probably is nowadays, but back then that was the minimum wage for a 17-year-old. So I was earning minimum wage of £4.35 an hour, essentially, and this is kind of how I quantified the money aspect, but one Starbucks drink, which is roughly £5, would cost me an hour's worth of my wage, right? So obviously it wasn't sustainable long term. It wasn't anywhere where you could kind of gain good financial stability or anything like that, or financial freedom. It was purely just a place of kind of having some form of income, right? Whether even if it was like that small, right? So that was my first position that I had. At this point in time, I probably had £500 in the bank, right? And I was just kind of saving that. I didn't know what to spend it on, same as when I was like 15, 16 with the £100. But I knew it probably would come into fruition and there was something that I could do with it in the future, right? And I did kind of, this is a bit kind of getting ahead of myself, but I realized in the end that investing into your knowledge, skill set and development is ultimately the best investment you could possibly make, with time, with effort, with money, whatever it is, right? But going back to the story, I didn't know this at the ages of 17. So essentially that was what I was doing, and I was doing A-levels on the side. I was studying all day, every day for the subjects that I was doing, and then on top of that I was then also coming home and then studying for tech, cybersecurity, which is my particular niche, because I ultimately wanted a tech career. Now, on the weekends, I was then doing the waitering position, right? And I was doing that for quite some time, like 7-8 months, something like that. And then I decided to move into retail because I thought, okay, well, I want some career progression, I want to earn more money, that kind of stuff. And I thought moving from being a waiter to moving to be a retail assistant would give me that. Now, it didn't. It barely gave me anything additional at all, actually. So essentially, I went from £4.35 an hour as a waiter to being on like £4.50 an hour, something like that. Like I remember it was still £4 something an hour. So I genuinely got like zero pay increase pretty much, right? And I was working longer hours, bigger shifts, less people, right? So less people to talk to, communicate with, have a laugh with, that kind of stuff. But one of the aspects I did like was just kind of getting out of the hot kitchen, because I would come home and I would feel greasy, right? I was standing in a hot kitchen for like 7-8 hours, running hot food on plates that were covered in gravy, all the way up and down spiral staircases to customers. And that was very, that was quite tricky. Like obviously I kind of mastered it to do it across like 8 months, but it was one that I kind of didn't want to do for the long term, right? Long term, it was tech, but also just even kind of in the short term, I didn't really see myself staying there much longer. So that's why I moved into retail. I was on, £4.50 an hour, something like that. It wasn't anything special. And that was over Christmas. So I was just basically doing that alongside my studies. And then from there, something quite interesting happened. So, and by this point in time, my finances were pretty much the same. Like I couldn't really, like maybe 600, 700, really not that much, right? And I was looking at kind of like wanting a career in tech, which would ultimately give me much bigger numbers, right? So minimum like, I don't know, 30k a year, something like that. But at this point in time, I didn't have that. But the interesting part that happened was the virus hit, right? Which basically just kind of brought everyone out of work, stopped the schools, everything like that. And I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. So essentially when that happened, my A-levels were kind of not cancelled, but basically like you're not going to do your grade, you're not going to do your exams, essentially, right? So instead, I got given like assessment grades, and I had about 3 or 4 months additional before I started an internship that I had lined up whilst I was in retail. So essentially, I was working in retail. On the side, I was doing A-levels, or like the other way around. And then in my spare time, I then managed to even acquire an internship position. But before that internship started, I had like 3 or 4 months, right? And I wasn't in school anymore because my A-levels were like, I was just given some sort of grade for them, right? Based on my previous assessments and stuff. So I literally didn't know what to do. So what did I do? Well, I decided to go back into work, right? Because of the discipline, right? That I kind of got instilled inside me. So essentially, I decided to work in a warehouse, right? I was like, well, I've done waitering, I've done retail. They clearly do not pay me any money. So let's actually go to working in a warehouse and seeing if that's any better. Now, I went from £4.50 an hour roughly to about £9.50 an hour working in a warehouse. I was working as many hours as possible. I truly wanted to max it out because I wanted that financial stability. So I was working like Monday to Saturday, like 8 a.m. to like 6 p.m., something like that. And I had one day off a week, right? And I did that for about 3 months. From there, it did give me some decent amount of savings. I wouldn't say it was like super loads. Probably say like 2-3K, something like that. I was living at home, so I was still living with my dad, right? And I was paying like, I don't know, £200 rent, something like that. So I kept the rest, right? Now, in terms of this, it gave me like a nice, I guess, bit of like a safety net, but it didn't provide me the stability that I was still looking for. So in this point in time, I was earning like £1,200 at the warehouse roughly per month, something like that. And this was up until I had the internship, right? So for those who don't know, basically, I managed to get a tech internship at the ages of 17 to start when I was 18, just before I went off to university. And that was in tech. That was in cybersecurity, right? And basically, when I did that internship, I was on about £20,000 a year. So I was on about £1,700 a month, I think after taxes, something like that. I remember £1,700 a month. Now, this was fantastic, right? This was genuinely like the part where I was like, okay, I know exactly what I want to do for the rest of my career now, right? And the reason for that was because of a lot of different factors, but one of them being the financial stability, right? The freedom, the additional savings that I could now save up. Because when I was working in a warehouse, I had to get to and from. I had to, of course, I was getting paid less money as well. I had to be on my feet all day, and it wasn't in the work that I wished to do. So it made the hours even longer than they should have been because I wasn't passionate about that. Whereas when I came into my internship, I was on £20,000 a year. I was making £1,700 a month after taxes. It was fully remote because of the virus, and it was also in what I wanted to do it in, right? So it made the time go by quicker because I enjoyed what I was genuinely doing. So all of these things was like, basically like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. And the proof of concept was there, right? Although it was only £20,000, right? It was in a place where I could have worked remote, or at least for the internship position that I had for the duration. It was also one that I actually enjoyed the work and what I genuinely wanted to do for the long-term future as well. So I thought, you know what, let's actually stick with this. I wanted to do this since the ages of 16. So let's stay in tech. Let's see how far I can get. Now, from the internship, that finished. I probably, at this point in time, I was like 18, just starting university. This was back in 2020. I probably had £4,000 to my name, something like that, right? And I'll kind of stop giving the numbers from this point onwards because this is where it exponentially ramps up, but I'll tell you more or less my salaries continuously, right? So in university, so I started university for computer science. In university, in the second year, I managed to get a position within the university, and it's to do a publication of research. So research for the university for cybersecurity, which is of course my field in tech. So in terms of this, I was on, this is going to be tricky actually. I think I was on like, I must have been on like £9-10 an hour, something like that. It was decent, but it wasn't obviously something special because of course you're still in university and the budgeting there for those types of positions are normally quite low. So I did that. That was great. Got some nice industry experience and I published research as well. But then this is kind of where it changed again, right? So from this point, I was going into third year. But just before I went into third year, I wanted another internship. I got an internship before university and I didn't have one leading up until me graduating and one actually in uni. So I started applying for positions in tech for ideally cybersecurity whilst I was in university. Now I did this at the end of year 2, right? So I finished the research paper, right? And then from there, I then was looking at internships for the summer coming up, right? So essentially it was kind of like September, October time, I started applying for internships at the start of the second academic year. And then I kind of went into trying to find an internship essentially. I almost lost my train of thought there, but yeah. So I started applying for some internships and one came from Apple, right? There was an Apple information security internship. It was in tech, it was an engineering one. I was just thinking, okay, I don't know too much about Apple, right? Obviously, I know it's a massive company, that kind of stuff, just the same as everybody else. But I had an Android phone. I wasn't like a massive diehard Apple fan, anything like that. So I thought, okay, well, you know what? Let's apply. Let's see what happens. So I applied for the internship position, and then I kind of forgot about it. It took about 3 months, right? 3 months went by. I didn't hear anything back. And then a little bit after that, I then got a congratulations email. And it was like, congratulations, you've been in progress for the first stage of the Apple Information Security Internship. And this was around about 2022, something around that, right? So I was kind of shocked that I even got an interview because I was thinking like, okay, I've done a lot, right? I've developed like proven systems to break into tech. I've got certifications, published research, an internship, that kind of stuff. But I thought genuinely like this is kind of like a bit mad. Like interviews at the world's biggest tech company, they don't just dish them out for free, right? Like they don't dish them out to everybody. So I was kind of a bit like taken back from that. But then I was like, okay, now I got to lock in. Right? I was like, if I want to get this, I got to work hard. I've got to apply everything that I've kind of curated as like strategies and systems over time to make sure that I can try to get this as best as possible. Now at this point in time, I don't know how much I had in the bank. Like, I don't know. No idea. But in terms of income, I had none because I was still a student. The research position ended. I didn't have an internship lined up, so I was only living off of my student loan, right? And I was still living at home at this point as well, paying about £200 a month in rent, plus, commuting fees to uni, tuition fees, that kind of stuff as well. So this was the situation I was in. So I ended up doing the interviews for Apple, and they actually went really well. Right, they was asking me stuff, technical stuff that I clearly knew very well based on the ages of 17 to 21, developing my technical skill set, and then of course also standing out above all of the other candidates based on the systems that I developed in the same time period as well. So I did that, and that actually led me to an Apple internship. Now this was at the ages of 21. I was 21 years old, I was in second year of university, and I lined up an Apple internship for tech. Right? And remember, this was based on my proof of concept from the internship, right? In terms of like the lifestyle, the financial abilities, the freedom, all of these things. This was a proof of concept from the internship. So I knew as a fact you could earn a lot of money working in tech. So I knew even as a broke teenager that this was the way forward. So that's exactly the path that I followed. And it led me into having an Apple internship at the ages of 21 while still in university. Now, this was something that was a pivotal moment for me, right? Because I never had something like this before. I had other internships before, and that was great. But at big company, like big tech, it was a different game. It was on a different kind of level, essentially. So I did the internship, right? And on the internship, I was on £30,000 a year. So I compared it based on the internship before. So I was on £20,000 a year for the original internship. For the Apple internship, it was £10,000 a year extra to that, and that was pro rata based on the months that I spent there. I maximised that as best as possible. So I'd completed all of my work, I did a fantastic job, and I genuinely put in the hours to make sure that I can get that graduate offer that they was not promising, but they said it was on the table if I did well in the internship. So I had that on the table, I maximised everything out, I did all of my work, and then what I tried to do, and this actually worked, but I wanted to extend my internship position by an extra, I think it was like 2-3 weeks, something like that, right? And the reason for that was because I get more experience, industry experience, I get more exposure, I get to develop my skill sets more, but also on top of that, since this is a finance video about going from being a broke teenager to 6 figures, I wanted to maximise my financial abilities as well. So I got even more kind of, salary because I extended my position there, and I was more than happy to do so because I was a good employee, I guess you can call it, something like that, where I basically I did the work to a good extent and they were very happy with that, so they didn't have a problem extending it. So I gained some additional money there as well, right? Maybe like an extra 1,800, something like that for an extra 2-3 weeks worth of work. Now from this actually kind of, the internship finished, I went back to university. I was eagerly waiting for about 2 months to see if I actually got the graduate position. Then get a phone call from the recruiter, the same recruiter that I was dealing with for the internship. Congratulations, you've now got the graduate offer. I was flabbergasted. I genuinely could not have believed that I even got an internship at Apple, let alone a graduate position to start as well after my studies finish. So that was genuinely like, once again, another pivotal moment for me, right? Because I was still a student. I had a bit of savings, sure. I was very kind of calculated and careful with my money, where I would spend it, what I would invest in, does it provide me the value that it should do for that price point, that kind of stuff, that kind of way of thinking. But this has now changed my life forever, right? And this is where it starts getting into the big boy numbers, right? So I had this conversation with the recruiter, and let me just have some Red Bull and then I'll tell you all of the numbers that you could possibly imagine. So I was thinking, so this was before before I actually got this call, I was actually thinking of the numbers that they could possibly put me on. I thought, well, I was on 30K for the internship at a minimum, so I'll most likely at a minimum be on 30K. Now, because it's not an internship and it's a full-time graduate position, I may be on a bit more. So I was guessing about 40K, something like that. I was guessing minimum 30K, average 40K, maybe 50 to 55K at like the max level, right? Because obviously I'm still a student, or I've just graduated, that kind of stuff. So those are the numbers that I had in mind. Congratulations, you've got the graduate position at Apple as an engineer working in tech. I was like, okay. I was like, fantastic. We then had the conversation about compensation and numbers. Tell me why he offered me £72,000 a year as a 21 fresh grad. This blew my mind out of the water. I genuinely did not know what to say or do. And I genuinely wanted to act professional, but at the same time I was trying to hold back my giddy excitement by being a 21-year-old soon to be on £72,000 a year. Like, if you actually think about those numbers, it's insane. And I'm incredibly grateful for it, right? I put in the work to get to where I'm at to today, which then led me to that position. So this is where I made £72,000 a year as a graduate, working at Apple as an engineer, working in tech, the dream lifestyle you could possibly imagine. I was living it, right? It's actually what got me this apartment, by the way. Almost as soon as I started the graduate position, I moved out into my own apartment, which is, of course, what you see here, right? So it's something that genuinely has changed my life, right? And in terms of this, right, this led on to even more things in the very soon future after it, right? And the reason why I'm telling you all of these numbers is because I'm very transparent. I want to show you what's possible if you get the right help, if you put the time in, if you put the energy in, what genuinely is possible for your life. You can change your life and the trajectory of it for the rest of your life and career if you just kind of get the initial parts correct and solved, essentially, right? By the way, guys, if you need help in terms of any of this, I'll put a link in the description and you can book in a call with me and we can discuss how I can help you further in terms of, getting those six-figure salaries, breaking into tech and everything like that. But going back to the story, right, I was a £72,000 a year engineer at the ages of 21, working in the world's biggest tech company in London. Now, I was on a graduate program. The graduate program was 2 years long, but after 1 year of that program, you then get promoted. So I started off as an entry-level engineer, and after 1 year, I got promoted to a mid-level engineer. Now that came with a nice salary increase as well. So I went from £72,000 a year to £94,000 a year. So just shy off of about six figures. This was at the ages of about 22. So this is, of course, where my main financial stability came in mind, where my, abilities to save more, let's just say that, grew as well, alongside also my salary that was also constantly growing on top of that. So there was a lot of different kind of aspects, and this was at the ages of 22. Now, I'm currently 23. So this has been this was my progression from being a broke teenager, right? I've literally taken you in 24 minutes, my entire trajectory from the past 5-6 years in about 20 minutes, from being a broke A-level student with barely £100 in my bank account to being on over six figures, working as an engineer in tech at Apple at the ages of 21, 22 on £94,000 a year. From there to there, it took about 4 or 5 years. And the reason why it took so long, and I call it so long because I work on extremely kind of short time frames. The reason why it took 4 to 5 years was because I spent about 3 to 4 of those years building out proven solutions, proven strategies, proven ways of actually getting me hired in tech, right? And this is going to be regardless of niche. So the systems that I built out, it's ultimately going to help me break into tech as it did. Now, I was not expecting the strategies to work this well to get me into the position that I am today, but I'm not going to be complaining, right? So what were those strategies, right? You're probably asking. Well, it was going to be ones that specifically correlated and tied to attracting interest and attention online as a candidate who is looking to be hired in tech, regardless of the niche. It's also going to be to acquire and obtain the maximum amount of interviews as possible, because one of the issues is going to be obtaining the interviews in the first place. Second one is going to be obtaining even more interviews and making it more probabilistic and having a higher success rate in terms of obtaining those as well. So I was also doing that. I was also thinking about how can I actually prepare for the interviews correctly, and doing this based on hundreds of interviews that I did to find out the best solutions to be able to do that. And then also how to perform in the interviews as well to ultimately get hired, because you can get everything up until the interview, but if you flop on the interview, you're not going to be hired, right? So that was also another key aspect that I decided to implement in terms of the strategies. Now, alongside that, it was then also offer negotiation to make sure that I'm always being paid what I'm worth as well, which ultimately led me into being on close to 6 figures at the ages of 21, 22. But some key takeaways of this video, right, is going to be do not underestimate any sort of career. And if you're genuinely kind of stuck in the middle, thinking of what you should do for your future, then I would highly encourage you to at least look into tech, because genuinely this has changed my life forever. And most people cannot say that about their careers, right? And it was also one that's very cost efficient with the time. For example, you could be on 6 figures as a doctor, but you've got to spend 7 years in medical school to ultimately get there. I spent 3 years in a bachelor's to get where I'm at to today. I'm more or less the same, if not a bit more, than what doctors make. So that's something to potentially weigh to see if tech is for you. Now, if you're passionate about tech, there's nothing genuinely actually stopping you from breaking into tech, right? You don't need to be naturally smart. You don't need a degree. You don't need extreme technical skills and to be the best. You just simply need to know how to be hired and what companies are looking for so you can portray that value to them. Now, in terms of the financial aspect, right, like I was very kind of conscious of money, even from a young age, even when I was broke, right? Because the closer you are up to the line, the more careful you have to be with the financial situations that you make. If you're barely making ends meet per month, you're not going to be spending £2,000 on a brand new flat screen TV, right? So I had that kind of mindset when I was broke, when I had £100, £200 in the bank account. So I was basically, let's say, okay, I remember this actually. So when I was in sixth form, a lot of my friendship group, there was like 4 or 5 guys that I used to hang out with. We always used to go into town and we used to get lunch together. I used to always bring a packed lunch in, but they always used to, and for most of the days, go to Favourite Chicken, right? It's kind of like I don't want to say a BTEC KFC, but it's actually really good. I've had it a few times. It was one of my favourite meals actually, but I refused to have it every single time that they had it because I knew that, and this was my logic, right? And maybe it's a bit strange, but essentially my logic was you pay money for this burger. I used to get this burger, it was really good. But you eat it, you have nothing to show for it. It doesn't give you really that much energy. In fact, it probably makes you more sleepy because of the calories. It doesn't contribute to your future in any meaningful way. And the money is effectively gone immediately. It's kind of like burning it, essentially, right? Because you could eat anything. As long as you're going to stay alive, that's all that kind of really matters, right? So that was kind of my mindset. And I had this mindset all the way through uni as well, because of course I was living off of a student loan. But now it actually gives me the financial ability to actually enjoy the money that I'm bringing in as, a 6-figure income at 23 without having to worry about those problems anymore, because I originally worried about those problems. And then now I don't need to, because I've got plenty to spend, to save, all of that kind of stuff as well. But that is genuinely every single step I took from zero to hero, from being a broke teenage student with £100 in my bank account as a 16/17-year-old to working in tech at Apple on 6 figures a year at 21, 22, and now it's on over six figures. As a 23-year-old now, I'm on over six figures. But that's ultimately every single step that I took. So I've given you some money advice and some value here regarding that. I've also told you about my specific trajectory that I took to break into tech, and specifically what happened at each and every step to ultimately help get the most amount out of it as possible as value, right? Whether that's benefits, salary, lifestyle, anything like that. I've also shown those steps here as well. But if you guys need help in terms of either A, breaking into tech, or B, getting the career progression or even salaries that you want to already being in tech, then yeah, as I've mentioned, go to the link down below and you can book in a call with me. We can talk about the coaching and how I can help you further. But that's ultimately everything that I wanted to share for this video. So hopefully you found this valuable, and I'll end the video here, but I'll see you in the next video.